From the Weston A. Price Foundation, welcome to the Wise Traditions podcast for wise traditions in food, farming, and the healing arts. We are your source for scientific knowledge and traditional wisdom to help you achieve optimal health. And now here is our host and producer, Hilda Labrada Gore.
Hey, Hilda here. You want to drink raw milk? Protect your children and yourself from unnecessary shots? Understand your rights when it comes to what food you buy and who you buy it from? This is episode 494, and our guest today is Julie Dean Richards. She is known as the Crunchy Legal Lady, and she has done our homework for us. Julie today gives us a number of ideas for understanding more deeply our rights to eat what we'd like, live as we'd like, and protect our rights to bodily autonomy. And she gives us tips for how to defend those rights. She covers everything from the need to be wary of foods that sport the right label but the wrong ingredients, to how to go about developing private membership agreements with our farmers to avoid government intervention in our food purchases. She also addresses what's happening with the avian flu, kind of like monkeypox these days, and how the fear generated is intended in part to control our small local food systems. Julie offers insights on the Amos Miller case, the Amish farmer in Pennsylvania, and she discusses Supreme Court rulings that make clear our rights when it comes to exemptions to vaccinations. She also tells us which states allow for a religious exemption and which do not, and what is actually required to obtain a religious exemption. Finally, she reminds us that being an activist does not always mean showing up in a courtroom or hiring a lawyer. Before we get into the conversation, I want to invite you to join us at the Wise Traditions Conference in Orlando this October, the 25th to the 27th. Mary Holland, the President and General Counsel of the Children's Health Defense, will be there. She is going to be a part of a health freedom panel that will answer important questions, such as what have been the biggest legal successes in recent years and the biggest disappointments? What are the most pressing health freedom related issues that need to be addressed today? And so forth. So do not miss this chance to hear from Mary Holland. And you can enjoy nutritious food, gain valuable knowledge, and form meaningful connections at the Wise Traditions Conference. Go to wisetraditions.org to sign up today, and we look forward to seeing you there. This is Hilda Labrada Gore, and you're listening to Wise Traditions. Welcome to Wise Traditions, Julie.
Thank you for having me. I'm excited to be here.
I think it's important because one emphasis of the foundation is activism, so it's important for people to know what legal ground we stand on. And at the same time, I feel like, can't we just grow our own food off grid and live our own lives without bothering with all this legal thing and defending our rights?
Yeah, it's a teeter-totter, kind of a balance, right? And I know many of us would love to just live our own lives and do our own thing. But if we aren't activists, if we don't know what legal grounds we stand on, then it's really hard for us to change the system or interact with it if it comes our way. And most of us in this world are going to end up having to interact with the system in some sense. And so my goal is to really help people to be able to just understand the system so you can actually use it.
Yeah, that's a good point, because as much as I want to kind of do my own thing, as we were discussing, I come across moments when I'm like, wait a minute, why is raw milk illegal where I live? So speaking of that, we have had to advocate for legalization across the U.S. and around the world, actually. What examples do you have, either pertaining to raw milk or other issues that are important for protecting our food rights?
Yeah, I think raw milk is a really good example of consumers pushing forward and pushing legislation so that we can have that natural milk. But I think other times that this has happened is hormones, when we are consumers really coming forward and saying, we don't want antibiotics in our food. We don't want these hormones in our cows. And now legally, these producers do have to tell us, do these have antibiotics? Do these have hormones in them? I think another great place we see this is, and this is not necessarily food, but it definitely affects all of us, is things like packaging. I think BPA is a huge shower of what consumers can do. Right now, most everyone knows that BPA is bad. And of course, producers have come in and now we have BPS and BPF and all these other things that are toxic. But we really have made this push that has allowed people to see, hey, this stuff in our food, this stuff in our packaging is not good for us. So much so that we have changed the way that producers do things. And now they know that they do have to put these labels on their food, that they do have to go to the consumer and say, hey, I'm trying to give you pasteurized food. I'm trying to give you food that is real and not fake anymore.
Yeah, that reminds me, we've had Vani Hari, the food babe, on the podcast, talk about calling the companies to task. She kind of is getting the public to pay attention to the ingredients in, so there's cereals, so there's mac and cheese. Some of us might choose not to have those at all. But those of us who do want to know, why in the US is it legal to have all these food colorings and preservatives that are banned in the UK or Europe? So it's really calling them out. And also fast food restaurants, like, hey, you said you're not using meat that has antibiotics in it, and yet your buns on your Chick-fil-A sandwich have glyphosate. I'm not trying to call Chick-fil-A out, but I'm just bringing the point to bear. What you're saying, Julie, is that our advocacy and our holding these companies accountable makes a difference legally too.
Yeah, it really does. And I think we can see that. And I know what's sad now, we have what we call greenwashing, right? We take these products where companies take the products and they try to tell you that they're healthy, even if they're not healthy. But even the very fact that we have things like greenwashing is showing us that companies do care about what consumers push for, and that litigation really does have an impact, and that it can continue to have an impact in many spaces that have to do with our health.
Can you tell us a little bit more? What is greenwashing for those who are unfamiliar with the term?
Yeah, so greenwashing is where a company will put on their packaging buzzwords like organic or free of sulfates or paraben free or things like that to get consumers to buy it, where they've actually put in more harmful chemicals, or they've just changed the formulation a little bit where it's still toxic or it's still bad for you, but the packaging's there to make you feel like, oh, it's great, it's clean, it's green. So greenwashing is something we definitely have to watch out for. And as I think we've come to learn, especially over the past few years, there's more beyond a label, right? There's something we have to look further into the label, no matter if on the outside it looks like it's green or clean or organic.
I'm just laughing because these companies have caught on to the fact that we want real food and as clean as possible. And if they don't change the product, as you were alluding, they'll at least change the label. I'm pretty sure I've seen Cisco food trucks going down the highway that have a picture of a farm or someone holding strawberries in their hand, and it looks so pristine, but I get the feeling that's not the setting from which our food is coming.
Yeah, definitely not.
So I want to talk about something that's happening right now, Julie. I want to pivot and talk about the avian flu. What do you know about that? And how can bird ranchers or farmers or homesteaders protect their livestock and their birds from overzealous regulations enforcement?
Yeah, I think this is a great question and really relevant right now. The avian flu, the first time we really saw the avian flu was in the 1970s, 1975. It came from Hong Kong, and it seemed to be like nothing we'd ever seen before. And now, since that time, the flu or H1N1 and the avian flu is often used as, I guess, an excuse or a reason to have farmers vaccinate their birds or to have people get vaccinated too, right? Because we have this fear that the avian flu will jump into people and start affecting people. And in this case, right now, what farmers or what the government is really worried about is finding the avian flu in things like our milk, right? There's been some pasteurized milk that has been found to have avian flu fragments in it, in other animals and birds. And so there's been kind of this collective fear to push farmers to vaccinate their birds, to vaccinate their livestock, and to treat it with harsher chemicals.
But Julie, that's not the only thing they're pushing for. I think they're actually going to farms and saying, this bird is sick or this animal is sick. And so they slaughter the livelihood of the farmers right there based on faulty evidence, I would say.
Yeah, and we definitely saw this in COVID as well, right? This fear of COVID infecting especially cows, and all these ranchers having to slaughter literally thousands of cows and destroying their livelihood. it's really difficult for farmers, right, dealing with this kind of regulation, especially when they want to deliver a product or an animal that really is pasture fed, living in a lifestyle that is as natural as possible. And so one of the things that I've found some protections for farmers is this may not be possible for everyone, but private agreements or PMAs can often be a good protection for farmers to be able to sell their crops directly to consumers rather than selling them on a bigger market.
No, I've heard of that. I've heard of PMAs, these private membership groups. So it's almost like a country club. And so what happens in the country club stays in the country club. What happens between this farmer or rancher that's selling me a product to consume is between us. And in this case, it keeps the government's hands off of what's going on. Is that right?
Yes, that's the point of a PMA, right? And at its base, really, a PMA is just a contract, right? It's an agreement between you and the consumer that you want these types of products, right? You want this type of animal. You want your animal pastured, living in a natural environment, eating its natural food, and that you're willing to pay that farmer for that experience, and you're willing to take the risks of something like the avian flu. And so there have been farms and farmers that have turned to PMAs to protect themselves. And sometimes that can be difficult for farmers who've been selling on a bigger market for a longer time, but it is possible to shift your business into more of a PMA model.
Who was the case in Pennsylvania? One of the Amish farmers. Did he have a PMA with his people or no?
Yes. So that's Amos Miller. And Amos did have a PMA. And the FDA did kind of go after Amos, even though he did have this protection. But one thing, the reason I think that that case kind of turned out the way that it did was because of the arguments that his lawyers were using. So their arguments were not centered around this private contract or private agreement. The arguments were more centered around the fact that he was Amish and that he was a sovereign citizen. They kind of tried to use these arguments that he doesn't have a birth certificate. He's not a citizen of the United States in the same way. He's a sovereign citizen. And because of that, I think that's why that PMA had a harder time. But I do think it is quite possible. And I have seen many PMAs be really successful in helping protect their food and their business in having this private contract.
We haven't talked about Amos's case on this podcast, so tell me what you know about how it did end up.
Amos Miller was a farmer who was selling his food privately through a private membership agreement to people around him, and you could buy it online all over the United States. And the FDA came in and said, we really want you to treat your animals a certain way. And in particular, it was a lot about bleaching and putting this meat in bleach and other things to get rid of potential pathogens or bacteria. And of course, Amos refused to do this, right? Why would you do that to your food? And the people that he was working with really didn't want him to bleach his food. That's what they wanted, the food and the product as natural as possible. So the FDA came in, gave him a bunch of fines, threatened jail time, and the action ended up going to court. And as far as I know, I don't know the full story, but he has had to pay those fines. And I'm not sure if he's actually going to switch his product or if he's just switching who he's selling it to. But as far as the fining, he did end up being fined. But again, in my opinion, it had a lot more to do with the arguments that were chosen rather than the method of what he was doing.
So thanks for that update. And of course, this just happened in the winter of 2024. It was January or February, I think, when he had this trial. So we will try to keep people abreast of that through the foundation's publications and so forth. But I did want to ask you, if we love a farmer, a local farmer, and a lot of us do who are probably listening to this podcast, how can we help them develop a PMA?
Again, a PMA is a private contract, right? It's a private contract between the consumer and the farmer. And so one of the things we can do, honestly, I mean, the Weston A. Price Foundation has great connections, right? They have chapters and chapter heads that will connect you to those farms where you can buy and sell directly with them. So that's one thing that you can do. but we can also encourage farmers by making contracts with them ourselves, by encouraging them to create private groups and to make this a private exchange. But even if they don't have a PMA, you're able to make contracts with whoever you want, right? Like that is part of being a citizen of America. Everybody has the rights and privileges to make contracts. So even if there's not a PMA around you, you can talk to your farmer and make a direct contract agreement with them to be able to buy the food the way that it is and write the terms yourself. Anybody can write a contract. It's not as difficult. And often we're doing it all the time. Even with our words, we're making promises, contracts. And so that's all a contract is we're making a promise, and you can put in the stipulations of that promise. I want this food to be natural. I want it to not have these hormones, and I'm willing to accept the risks that maybe this might be infected or that maybe I might get sick if the food is bad, things like that. So you can make those terms yourself and go to your farmers yourself.
I'm smiling because we take this risk all the time with people we don't have contracts with. In other words, anything I buy at the store, I don't know where that came from. Hamburger meat, by the way, you might know this already, Julie, but it is a mix of cows from all around the country. Some of these big processing and meat provider companies are pulling it all together, so we could never even trace where that came from. But I'm saying I trust this because it's got some little USDA label at the store, but chances are I'm really actually taking a risk at all times with my food unless I'm growing it in my backyard, and maybe even then.
Yeah, no matter what we do in life, there's risk. And especially when we're buying from big companies that we actually don't know. We don't know how they work. We don't know all their processes. We don't know them personally. And so why not instead go to a farmer that you do know? Go to someone smaller. And if you don't know a farmer, you're here at the Weston A. Price podcast. You can connect to your chapter head and you can connect to your farmers that way. They've done a lot of the work for you. And I've worked with chapter heads before and they are awesome. They do a great job vetting farmers. They do a great job helping you find what you need. So there are resources if you want them.
That's right. Absolutely. And I will put a link in the show description so people can find their local chapter leader. These are volunteers and their only job is to get you a list of real food resources, farms that are in your area or delivered to your area. And you can find out more as you connect with them. So awesome reminder of that. So I want to back up for a second, Julie, and ask, Amos Miller is not the only one who has had a raid on his farm and kind of an overreach, I would say, of some federal agencies that are ostensibly trying to protect us. What is going on with these agencies that most of us are unaware of?
There's lots going behind the scenes of that. But I think something that most people don't know is that the way that things like the FDA and the CDC and work is that often they're working with the manufacturer rather than the consumer. So what I mean by that is when products are tested, when products are brought to market, when you want something to be FDA approved, what happens is that the manufacturers are the ones doing the studies. It's not the FDA doing the studies. And many times people think that it's the FDA doing the study. We think that the FDA's job is to go in and to check, is this all good? And to do studies on these products. But actually what happens is the manufacturer comes to the FDA and they say, hey, we want you to approve our product. Here is some money that we'll give you in order for you to approve our product. And then the FDA says, okay, great. Show me your studies that you've done on your product. I'll take a look at them. And the FDA sometimes can do some interim checking in on what's going on with these studies, but they are not the ones running the studies. The manufacturer is the one running the studies, and the manufacturers are the ones giving the FDA the data that they then make a decision on whether or not they are going to approve that product. So what happens is the manufacturer will give them the data, the studies, and if the FDA says like, okay, these studies are looking good, we're going to get a committee together. So then the FDA takes this information that comes from the manufacturers and gives it to the committee. And then the committee sits there. In my experience, I've been in lots of these meetings. And the FDA will come and say, all right, committee, we're going to take 2 days, or we're going to take a whole work day, 8 hours, and we're going to show you a bunch of presentations. You watch the presentations, and then in the end, you vote, right? You vote on whether or not the product is going to be FDA approved or not.
But of course, just to state the obvious, the manufacturer of the product is going to have the results that look best for them so that it will get approved and then they can get on the market regardless of how it affects the health of the consumer.
Yes, they will. And sometimes the FDA does, like I said, they will do some interim analysis. They'll take what the manufacturer gives them and they will do some analysis and look at that. However, just like you're stating, even if they're doing some analysis, the information that they're receiving is coming straight from those manufacturers. And so the data that they're getting ultimately comes from the manufacturer, and the manufacturer is the one who gets to present their data the way that they want to these committee members who, in my opinion, often don't have enough time with this data. They're given this data maybe a day ahead of time. They get to look at this packet, which is available to the whole public. If you want to look at these packets, you can look at these packets as well. You can attend these meetings if you would like. But they get the information maybe a day or two before. They look through the information. Then they have these presentation after presentation, little break for lunch. They get some public comment, another presentation. The manufacturer gets to make their statement of why, please, you should make this product FDA approved. And then they vote, right? They vote with this little information that they have.
Coming up, Julie addresses our rights for defending our children's bodily autonomy, and she goes over how to identify medical practitioners that will honor those rights.
You're listening to the Wise Traditions podcast from the Weston A. Price Foundation. We pause now to recognize our sponsors.
One Earth Health. Explore the amazing benefits of organ meats with One Earth Health. Did you know that organ meats from New Zealand are 400% more packed with nutrients compared to those from other countries? That means you get a lot more vitamin A, K, and the B complex, plus other high-quality nutrients. At One Earth Health, they put these nutrients into easy-to-take capsules. Their cows are raised in pastures without GMOs or pesticides. And what's special about the capsules? They are filler-free, just pure 100% organ meat. And their prices are the best for organs from New Zealand. One Earth Health's popular beef organ supplement bottle is just $39.99. And it comes with 200 capsules. So boost your nutrition with One Earth Health now. Go to their website, oneearthhealth.com/wisetraditions for a special sign-up page that gives you a 15% discount. Again, that's oneearthhealth.com/wisetraditions for a special sign-up page that gives you that 15% discount. And the new biology clinic. Modern healthcare systems are failing us. Months-long waits for appointments are typical, only to spend 10 minutes with a doctor who quickly makes a generic diagnosis, resulting in medication dependency, invasive treatment options, and unpleasant or harmful side effects with no real cure. If this sounds all too familiar, consider a different approach with a new biology clinic founded by Dr. Tom Cowan, a respected alternative medicine doctor who also happens to be the Weston A. Price Foundation's vice president and on the board. He is offering a new perspective on health and wellness through this new biology clinic. And at our conference, actually, he's going to explain what sets this clinic apart and this approach apart. I'm telling you, it's not about quick fixes. The practitioners take time to understand your story, recognizing that illnesses have various causes, and you deserve a personalized healing experience. Clinic members enjoy a flat monthly fee that includes a range of valuable services like virtual health consults as needed, practitioner-led live streams on diverse health topics, access to a members-only resource library, and multiple live group sessions every month. And the sessions cover everything from fitness to breathing integration to EFT tapping and more. And there are membership options for individuals, small families, large families, pet health, and enrichment only, even one-time health consults without a membership commitment. Unlike traditional healthcare that thrives on frequent visits, prescriptions, and treatments, the new biology clinic's motivation is to get you healthy and to keep you that way. So go to newbiologyclinic.com to learn more, or reach out to their friendly care team via phone or email, which you'll find on their website. Your journey to genuine healing begins here. Again, that's newbiologyclinic.com to learn more, and reach out to their friendly care team via phone or email from that site. This is Hilda Labrada Gore, and you're listening to Wise Traditions. So now, Julie, we've talked a lot in the first half of our conversation about food and our rights as consumers to get the food that we want at the quality that we want. Let's talk a little bit about our rights as parents. How can we protect our children's bodily autonomy from the onslaught of vaccines everywhere we turn? It's hard to find practitioners of medicine who will work with the parents to find exceptions to the schedule that's so heavy right now that's recommended.
Yeah, so I actually do on my website, it'll be available to everybody, but I have a whole packet. It's like 23 pages all about how to assert your bodily autonomy in medical situations. This is one of my big passion projects. I know not everyone has a great doctor who they can turn to or who will work with them. But I would like to say, in the end, it is always your choice. Now, a provider may come to you and they may say, you cannot come to my practice unless you decide to vaccinate your child or unless you take such and such product. But you always have the choice to say, well, no, then we'll leave your practice. And luckily, these days, there are an abundance of telehealth providers that you don't have to be in the same state as. You can call these providers. You can look up providers who are functional medicine providers online. You can find people who are more aligned with you. And I would like to state, it is your choice to even bring your child to the doctor in the first place. The Supreme Court has stated that parents, they are the guardians of their children. They are the ones who make the most decisions for them. They're the ones in charge of their health. And so you have the choice to switch doctors. You have the choice not to take your child to a doctor. And you always have the choice to refuse medications. Now, I know a lot of parents get a little afraid about this, of course.
Yes, because some school systems seem to be quite rigid about the requirements. As a matter of fact, when my kids were little, I didn't know that I had the option to opt out. But I remember thinking, well, I guess I'll just vaccinate them because I know it's needed for school. I didn't know what my rights were at all. Do you have any place where we can look and see if I'm in a certain state, what rights I have for a religious exemption, perhaps, or some kind of exemption to the recommended vaccination schedule for children to attend school?
On my website, I also have all these guides are free. The bodily autonomy guide is free and the vaccine exemption guide is free. And it will teach you everything you need to know about exemptions for school and for work and even immigration. And I link to great websites that will help you know what the exemption process will look like in your state. But every state has a medical exemption. And almost every state has a religious exemption to vaccination. There's a case called Jacobson v. Massachusetts. It's been used a lot against people who don't want to vaccinate their children. But one good thing that came out of this Supreme Court case was that states must provide exemptions to any kind of product, medication, and that includes vaccination. So
even California, I have to ask.
Yes, even California. That's why California still does have a medical exemption. Whether or not you can actually get that medical exemption is another question, but they have to have that discretionary medical exemption.
Well, I'm glad you mentioned adults too, because not every listener has kids, and some people have felt pressed into vaccination schedules by their employers.
Yes, definitely. That has been a huge fight over the past 3 years between employers and employees. And the reason I talk so much, and I think we talk so much about religious belief exemptions, is because it is the exemption that is most available to most people, right? In some states, luckily, they have a philosophical belief exemption. And that would be amazing. Wouldn't it be amazing if every state had a philosophical belief exemption to vaccination, which I think every state should, right? And that's something that we can work towards.
Yes.
But not everybody has a medical condition that they can point to that says, I can't receive vaccination. But everybody does have belief. And the way that the Supreme Court has defined religious belief, you do not have to be part of an organized religion to get a religious belief exemption or to have religious beliefs. And I think that's something that we talk about religious belief exemptions, and many people may say, well, I don't go to a specific church or I don't have some kind of organized religion. What about me? What can I do? And the answer to that is if you believe in any kind of higher power, if you believe in anything higher than yourself, then you can have a religious belief exemption. And you don't need any kind of clergy to sign off on it. In fact, if you are being asked to have clergy sign off on it, then that's something you should really push back against and say, hey, the Supreme Court said you can't do that. Because they did.
Wow. That's so interesting because my husband actually has a master's of divinity from Fuller Theological Seminary in California. And he was applying for an exemption. I won't state with which school system where he was working at the time. And do you know, they rejected it. Even though he has a master's of divinity, they rejected it. They would not give him a religious exemption. So happily, he was able to get out of the employment situation. But you would think that a man with a master's of divinity who could be called to be a preacher anywhere would get that exemption, but no. So some employers, I guess, don't know the law, or I guess they're kind of throwing their weight around. Is that right?
Yeah. So something that's kind of happened, there's a little bit of good news and a little bit of bad news. But the good news is there's a recent case just in 2023 called Groff v. DeJoy. And this case was about Title VII, which provides protections for religion in the workplace. And under Groff v. DeJoy, the Supreme Court said employers must accommodate religious practice as long as it doesn't financially interfere with their business. So now the business, in order to say that they have what's called an undue hardship, they have to show accommodating this religious belief will put hardship on my financial situation. They have to basically pull out their books and say, financially, this is really going to hurt me, which is not the case with most people in vaccination. Maybe if you're a health employer, maybe you could say, this is really going to affect my financials because of the rules we have in place. But for most people, it's going to be really difficult to say, no, I can't accommodate your religious exemption to vaccination. However, the bad news about this is it's likely to push employers to then question people's sincerity of their religious beliefs.
Yeah, now that you mention it, I think the undue hardship thing was the argument they had because my husband was working in a school at the time. So they were saying it's not going to hit them financially, but it would jeopardize the students' health.
Yeah, and now it's going to be a lot harder for them to say that, to take that tack. But what they will do instead is employers are allowed to look into a little bit the sincerity of your beliefs. And there are several questions that they might ask about your sincerity of belief, like, are you acting consistently before? And so they might ask you, have you had previous vaccinations? And if you have, they might say, well, what about, why is it this one, right? Mm-hmm. They might ask about that, but it's not their job to question whether or not your beliefs are logical, whether or not your beliefs are really theological or align with theology. They really can't question that. All they can question is the actual sincerity of your belief. So one of the big things that ends up happening sometimes in these employer-employee cases is that the employer will say, hey, I want to know X, Y, and Z about your beliefs, or I want to know whether or not you've had vaccinations in the past. And employees, they feel kind of pressed upon, or they're really worried. And so they don't end up giving all the information, right? They try to keep some of this information from their employer. And then that ends up kind of looking bad because they do need to give that. If your employer requests information, they can ask for that information and you should give it to them. And in the end, what it comes down to is you truly, sincerely expressing your belief. For example, I have a friend who, I guess he uses the term, he fled here from Canada. So he fled to the United States and he did not want to be vaccinated. And he said, hey, I don't want to be vaccinated. And he applied for a blanket exemption from vaccination. And they said, well, you've been vaccinated in the past, right? You've been vaccinated in the past. What is it? It looks like you're just trying to get out of this vaccination. But his argument back was, I didn't know, right? Like I didn't know before what was in these vaccines. Most of my vaccinations were my parents' choice, not actually my choice, because many of us are vaccinated when we are little, right? Many of us have those vaccines. And so you can talk about, right, that was my parents' choice, not my choice. And I have sincere religious beliefs that prohibit me from being vaccinated. And now that I have this information, right, I'm trying to repent, basically. Like I'm trying to make changes in what I'm doing. And so I would just tell people, don't be afraid if they ask you for this information. Just be honest, just be sincere, because that's the most important thing especially when working with the employer, is that you show that like I am really sincere about my religious beliefs.
Right. It's funny that we have to defend that though, because on any given day, let's say I don't believe in stealing, which I don't actually, but one day someone sees me take an apple from a tree. Yeah. We don't always live consistently with our beliefs, I guess is what I'll say. But hopefully no one would say to me, why did you take that apple without asking? It's just, there's so many inconsistencies in our lives. But I get it's the legal world, right? And so they're trying to hold your feet to the fire and get you to comply.
Yes, yes. And I think what the Supreme Court and what the law is really worried about is using religious beliefs in a way to twist the system, right? They're trying to keep people from using this in a way that makes it so that they are a law unto themselves, which is actually a quote from a Supreme Court case, that they're worried about people becoming a law unto themselves. Which on the one hand, understandably, we want law and order. We want people not to attack each other. We want to make sure that we are being good citizens and that we can work together because we all live in proximity to each other, be good neighbors.
Yes.
But on the other hand, in many ways, right, your religious beliefs are meant to be a law unto themselves in many ways, right? Your higher conscious, whatever your higher power is, God, Christ, whoever, is your higher law. And in that way, we are all laws unto ourselves, whether or not we want to be, or whether or not we like that, or the Supreme Court likes it, in that way, we really are laws unto ourselves. So it is this big kind of balancing test that I think the legal system's trying to do. But I do think we have made, with our awareness of vaccination and how it really can harm people, we really have made some leaps and bounds. And now there are even people in Congress who are starting to understand this is an important issue and we need to change the way that we look at these things.
That is encouraging. And Julie, can you tell us another story that might encourage us when it comes to defending our rights to either make our own food choices or defend our bodily autonomy against shots?
Yeah, I think one of the best ones that has, I think, been talked about the past year is we have been able to restore religious exemptions in some states. And I know that you know Del Bigtree, and I can, and I've actually had the privilege of working with Aaron Siri and that legal team on some of these issues and trying to help free the five states who don't have religious exemptions. And we have been able to be successful in restoring some of those religious exemptions through our legal work. I think that's incredibly important to acknowledge. We did that. We have done that. The people have spoken and pushed back and restored religious exemptions.
In the 5 states that you were trying to free?
In one of the 5 states, yes, in Mississippi.
And what are the other 4 that we still need to free?
Yeah, so there's West Virginia, California, New York, and Rhode Island is the last one.
Okay. But it is encouraging that the tide is turning. I think you're right. There's growing awareness. Actually, because of the whole COVID narrative, people started thinking, wait, why are you incentivizing me or pushing me or mandating me to get something that I don't want? So this is really encouraging on this front. But what do you say, Julie, as we start to wrap up? I'm thinking of the person who's like, you know what? I don't want to do legal battle at all. I want to just live my best life and ignore all the legal issues. What do you say to a person like that?
Yeah, I think one of the things to acknowledge is, well, one is sometimes we do have to do things that we don't want to do. And that is difficult, right? And we do them very lovingly and willingly, oftentimes for our children, right? We don't want to be up at 3 a.m. with our child, helping them when we ourselves feel sick and they're sick, but we do it anyway because we love them. And in the same way, we do this and we fight these legal battles for our children. And they're not always difficult to fight. There are things that you can do that don't require you to be in a courtroom, and they don't require you to hire a lawyer. oftentimes we can just donate to different programs. We can write emails. We can show up and attend some of these meetings at the FDA or the CDC. We can listen in. We can make our voices heard in so many different ways. You don't have to hire a lawyer to do this. You don't have to do some of those big, scary things. All you have to do is be willing to put your voice out there just a little bit, just give a little bit, and do it for the love of your children and for the love of our nation in general.
Yes. And just as we started at the beginning, Julie, I want to restate that activism is a key component of the Weston A. Price Foundation. And we send out to our email list simple action alerts pertaining to where they are in the world, usually in the US, and anything that has to do with legislation where they can do a simple action, just like you're saying, where they can email a legislator or contact their senator or do something on a more local level to defend our bodily autonomy and our food freedom. So great word to end on. I have one final question to pose to you that I love to pose at the end. If the listener could only do one thing to improve their health, what would you recommend that they do?
My recommendation might be a little unconventional, but my recommendation would be to learn and to follow the cycles of the earth, to take your time to look up at the moon, look up at the sky, look up at nature, and to just follow its cycles. And as you more fully follow the cycles of nature, you'll see yourself, your hormones, everything else falling into place.
Beautiful words to end on, Julie. Thank you so much for this conversation. It's been a pleasure.
Of course.
Our guest today was Julie Dean Richards. You can visit her website, crunchylegallady.com, to learn more. And I am Hilda Labrada-Gore, the host and producer of this podcast for the Weston A. Price Foundation. You can find me at holistichilda.com. And for the transcript for this episode, visit our website, westonaprice.org, and click on the podcast page. And now for a recent letter to the editor from the Spring 2024 Wise Traditions Journal. I have a small midwifery practice and a very large nutritional counseling practice, primarily helping Amish and Mennonite women across the U.S. I have been an advocate of Dr. Weston Price's research for a long time. Recently, I reached a crisis point in my midwifery practice. Although I have always encouraged healthy eating, my clients have not always listened. Since mid-December, in only 1 month, I have had 1 client with preeclampsia, 4 out of 7 clients with high blood pressure, 1 stillbirth. It is heart-wrenching to go to the funeral and watch a young couple bury their first child. And there are more stories to recount. It has been a long 4.5 years as a midwife. This is not normal. I went back through Dr. Price's book, meticulously looking for answers. I am in the process of writing a nutritional manual, and I'm going to require all of my midwifery and nutritional clients to read it. It is going to focus on statistics that report the alarming increase in complications, both in the prenatal period as well as during labor and delivery in the U.S. And then I will weave in Dr. Price's findings and how they correlate to the current statistics. There are consequences to what we eat. At each prenatal visit, I'm going to ask my clients to tell me where they stand on their nutritional goals. I want them to visualize where they are on the spectrum and help them move from the left side of the page with a lot of the refined foods of modern civilization to the right side of the page that lists foods that support bodybuilding, repair, and maintenance. I realize that I will not get everybody to jump to the right side of the page at the beginning, but I want them to see the need to be walking in that direction, and I want them to realize that they are not there yet and to take responsibility for what they eat. I am trying to reach people who eat bromated flour, packaged cereal, and Cool Whip. Unfortunately, this is not a group of people that is looking for how to improve their health, nor will they take the time to read Dr. Weston Price's work yet. I will be working on that. I want to get this information out to a segment of the population that needs help and doesn't realize that they need help. Name withheld. Thank you so much for your letter to the editor. Each of us is like a drop, I don't want to say in the bucket because that sounds small, but a drop in the ocean that is making a difference until this huge tidal wave of healthy living and healthy information will reach each person. If you can hear my voice, you are part of that movement, and thank you. And thank you too for listening, my friend. Stay well, and remember to keep your feet on the ground and your face to the sun.
On behalf of the Weston A. Price Foundation, thanks for listening. We have many free resources to support you on your health journey. Visit westonaprice.org to find podcasts, articles, videos, and more. You can also find a local chapter near you for help in finding sources of great food. We invite you to support the Foundation's mission of education, research, and activism by becoming a member. Thanks again, and take care. Wise Traditions is a project of the Weston A. Price Foundation for wise traditions in food, farming, and the healing arts. The content on this podcast is provided for informational purposes only and is not intended to substitute for the advice provided by your doctor or other healthcare professional. It is not intended to be, nor does it constitute healthcare or medical advice.